Hi. So happy to be here. I just walked down just before all this happened with the beautiful canapes on the cucumber with the walnut was so good, so vegan. But I walked down in the basement the hall of hot metal. And there are machines down there that look like they should be in the Smithsonian, but instead they're actually making books, which is beautiful.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here. We're here tonight to kind of talk about paper in all its forms. A lot of us are collectors. It's a neat lens to talk to people through, I find. Were you ever bitten by the book collecting bug? What does your personal library look like?
Well, okay, I never thought of myself as a collector, and I think that the bug bit me. It just happened, and it happened in a big way with something I'll talk about later, which is newspapers. But really what happened is that I wrote about card catalogs and was upset that libraries were getting rid of them. Not that electronic catalogs were not beautiful things, but that the drawers moved so smoothly, you know, and your fingers just danced. They danced down the subject headings, and I loved it. But then, and after writing that, 3 librarians, but especially Melissa Riley and Andrea Grimes, who are here tonight, sort of gave me the story of the San Francisco Public Library and that there had been some unfortunate panic weedings that had happened there, and I gave this speech, and I became a little over-involved, you know, and I wrote a piece about this for the New Yorker, and I remember Tina Brown asking my editor, has Nick gotten too involved in library activism? But it felt like the right thing to do. But and as a result of that, I became, with my wife Margaret Brentano, a collector of 30 tons of American newsprint. So that's my collection. But let me just show you. My actual collecting is terrible. I'm messy. And I'm looking into art, so I have a pile of art books, of course. And my wife is very good at making the mix. You know, you got to have the mix of the old books, but with a few new paperbacks stuck in there. And I like when the sunlight hits them. And my father collected very odd scientific books, so we've ended up with that. Although he's still around, still collecting, and I love when the sun hits the books. So that's my collection. It's just sort of a random accumulation more than a collection.
Well, thank you. So I know you've kind of come prepared to talk about that experience, the double-fold experience, and how you came to own that amount of tonnage of newsprint. Would you just like to jump right into that? I think that is the sort of best place to start.
Okay, well, what happened was, let's see. Here's actually, this is the true weight of paper, which is the topic of this thing. Is I wrote books, and then you have a box. Actually, it's all the notes and first drafts of the mezzanine, and it's in a box in the storage place. And the storage place, sometimes the boxes don't behave, you know. And then you're sort of the curator of all of the different editions of your books. But what happened to me was after the controversy with the San Francisco Public Library, this man named Bill Blackbeard came and said, no, you're writing about the wrong thing. It's really about the clean out of American newspapers in American libraries, including the Library of Congress. And so I started looking into it. Here's a volume of the New York Post, a fairly important paper. The New York Post was obliged legally to send several copies to the Library of Congress, and they, in their wisdom, bound it. So it went to, in this case, to a kind of knacker's yard in New Jersey, where they cut out individual issues of these newspapers as newspapers of the day you were born. They sold them for $39.95. So you start with a bound volume that was in good shape, that was on a shelf in a major world library, and you end up with a guillotine machine that slices off the edges and cleans it up, puts it in a plastic bag, and sends it out as an individual issue. And this is what their back room looked like. And this is what the New York Times looked like. So I was upset, and I was writing a book about this that I already knew the title. That was Double Fold, which related to a test. You could test whether a piece of paper was brittle or not in a book, a page, by folding the edge back and forth. And if the edge broke off, that meant that it suffered from embrittlement, which was a terrible, fatal disease. Of course, when you turn a page, you don't actually fold the edge back and forth, you just turn the page. And so books are actually more durable than that. But the British Library said that we're going to dispose of all of our foreign, what's it called, overseas newspapers. And I happen to know that their overseas newspaper collection was totally singular, rarer than Gutenberg Bibles, incredibly great, and that they'd bound them beautifully. And so I went there and said, don't throw these away. These are books, these are bound volumes with vellum corners and all that stuff, nice, kept in, not in climate-controlled conditions, but just in sort of normal ambient conditions, and in fine shape. Don't get rid of them. And they said, no, we're auctioning them off. So I had to put in some of our retirement fund, raise some money, and I bought, with my wife, $205,000 worth of American newspapers. We were young then. And here's the New York World, bound by the British Library, but an American paper that was published 1 million copies a day or thereabouts by Joseph Pulitzer. So the most read thing in the United States in 1903, and it was stamped the one thing they did absolutely slavishly and conscientiously was stamp everything with British Library discard. So you'd know that they got rid of it. Or if it had a British museum, because it used to be the British Museum, they stamped BL canceled over everything. I love that. And they all ended up, when we bought them, they ended up being shipped to this former mill in Rollinsford, New Hampshire. And we took it, so right where that red car is all the way to the end of the building, it was sort of like a locomotive, of the New York Times. Another locomotive of the Chicago Tribune. Here's the New York World, Pulitzer's paper. I mean, tremendous, tremendous, fascinating paper. Students from the University of New Hampshire came in and sorted them, and these things were heavy, and that's why I think of this is what taught me about the weight of paper. An individual newspaper is very light, but if you bind that thing with a week of its brethren, it becomes heavy. So here's the New York World before Pulitzer bought it. It's 8 pages long. It's on very good cotton rag paper. Okay, it's beautiful stuff. It's very durable. It's very small number of pages. And then he bought it and transformed it. And he printed the paper on these Ho printing presses in the basement of the Pulitzer building. And then the British Library got the paper and bound it, and they trimmed the edges, notice? And they did this great preserving thing that librarians do, which they bind it. And that squeezes out the air and stops the chemical reactions that happen with newsprint from happening so quickly. So actually, these things were fine, even though they weren't air-conditioned or frozen or anything like that. And I went to England and just looked at them and thought, wow, these look so good, and that's why I raised the money and we moved them to a tiny mill town in New Hampshire. Here's what they look like on microfilm. Okay, so that's what I was up against. Made by the New York Public Library. God bless them. It's fine to take a picture of an American newspaper. I'm totally for it, but don't take the picture and then throw out the original and say you're done, okay? Don't do that. And here's The Happy Dream of the Accident Lawyer. Here's Émile Zola listening to a joke. They loved skyscrapers. Pulitzer was obsessed with New York's grandeur and chronicled every phase of every building and every new thing. He got the Statue of Liberty started. He got the New York Public Library started. And here's the Woolworth Building, but behind the Woolworth Building, almost as high, is the gilded dome of the Pulitzer Building, the New York World building itself. And he wanted people to participate in his newspaper. So here's the watercolor set. You would, as a kid, dip your brush in those New York World ink colors and then color in the pictures that their artist had drawn. Or you could dye your Easter eggs in New York World Easter egg patterns. Or what if you were interested in the fashions of Paris and you wanted to keep up? Well, they gave you a pattern to make a French dress. Teddy Roosevelt giving speeches, our enemies, the Spanish in Cuba, very bad people. Our guns are big. Stephen Crane is on the scene writing about the fighting in Cuba. Pulitzer dies, and they write on the front page, the story of his life. He was a very eccentric man. He lived on a boat. He was blind. His assistants would read the headlines, and he would say, "Get rid of that, or do that. I want facts. He was just a very opinionated, difficult, bristling man who utterly changed the way Americans read the news. He understood that people read the right-hand side of the newspaper differently than they read the left-hand side. Anyway, so he influenced all the newspapers. Here's Arthur Conan Doyle, syndicated in the Sunday magazine of the New York Tribune, which became the Herald Tribune. And of course, they had paper dolls, Little Nemo, the comic strip, rotogravure sections in the New York Tribune, printed on a separate printing plant, and here they are on microfilm. You could see the sprockets of the microfilm. Germany surrenders, but you can treat your face with radium. So this is how the Chicago Tribune, which was another one of the locomotives that we had in this place, and I would just walk down the row and pick up a volume from, in this case, 1945, and open it up, and I was in a world of the past with an immediacy that I hadn't understood was available to me, that it was a time machine, that it worked to open up, and that I would sink into the weight of that particular story. Atom bomb, cruise story, is it 60% of Jap City wiped out? That's how they covered Hiroshima. The person who lighted the fuse was the person who made the Japs sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, and therefore there had to be Hiroshima. And here's the way they covered the unconditional surrender of Japan. This is the god of war holding the atom bomb over Japan. You're asking for it. And of course, the movie industry took it up immediately, and Up and Atom, Bombshell, Incendiary Blonde. So anyway, I thought, and my wife thought, we could do this for a little while, and people came to visit, and that was nice. But this wonderful guy in charge of Duke University's libraries, David Ferriero, said at one point, I gave a talk with him, and he said, we'll take the newspapers. Nobody else wanted to. The Library of Congress, I tried to woo Princeton. They came and looked at them. No, we can't have that. But David Ferriero said, yes, we'll take them. And they came and they studied them, and they thought about this is Bob Bird and these two librarians, and they were kind of daunted, but volunteers came and packed them up. I got pretty good, fairly good at that lift. Here I'm writing somebody at the Knight Foundation saying we need more money because we've each wrapped 40 pallets at 1,600 pounds apiece. So I loaded the truck with these newspapers, all wrapped and shrink wrapped, and then they would get stuck on the truck, and I would have to kick them out, kick the electric lift out from under the newspapers, and they drove away. And we cried. And they ended up at Duke University. So if anyone wants to see the last remaining run of these things, these dinosaur creatures, they're there. And that's what led me to write Double Fold. But also I was taking pictures at the same time. And the state of the art then was 4x5 transparencies. So I took a lot of pictures. My wife edited and wrote the book, The World on Sunday, which was just about the New York World, not the other papers. And just to sort of show the world this lost world of color and strangeness. But it also influenced me to write other books like Human Smoke, which relied heavily on newspapers, and Baseless as well. So that's how I came to do that project, which was probably the best thing that my wife and I ever did. We had fun with it too.
That's incredible.
Thank you.
When I first read Double Fold years ago, I recalled it being this story of libraries and the evolution of libraries and how and why we store things. And this time, as someone who's part of a team who has to move 45 tons of type, I read it as a cautionary tale about collecting.
It is. I mean, the point is that I was too harsh then, and in Double Fold, there's some moments in the book that make me wince because it is actually really hard to hold on to stuff. If the research library saves it, then we can throw it away. I mean, we can get rid of it. The newspaper collection that's piling up in the corner of your living room or the magazine collection, we can say, well, we'll get rid of that. We'll recycle it because these research libraries will keep them. And in the case of the New York Times and some of the other big papers, that isn't true. The New York Times doesn't keep its own paper. So I was worried about that. But it is a hard job. And what was happening in the federal government was there was no money being given to libraries to store things because what was exciting was, if you can believe it, microfilm. So there was tons of money being given to buy microfilm cameras and transform collections. It was called preservation, but it was actually destruction. And no money to just build a big building and hold on to it. And I do thank you for being willing to move the tonnage of type and all that stuff. It's an amazing project.
Well, what I love about the book is that you really dig into how and why we store things. What I enjoy about your writing about technology is that it's not dismissive. I mean, there is you do identify some value. And sort of what's lost and gained in your mind when it comes to digital preservation?
Well, I mean, when you go to the museum and you see a beautiful painting on the wall, and then you go to the gift shop and you buy a postcard of that painting, it's not that you're saying the postcard is equivalent to the painting. You're saying, I love this thing, and I want to have a little image of it. And so all of these beautiful digitization projects are ways of celebrating and making frictionlessly available things that are precious and exciting to look at. So I'm totally in favor of that. The quibble that I had back in 1999 and 2000 when all this blew up was that they were saying that taking the picture on high contrast black and white microfilm or taking the picture with its state-of-the-art flatbed scanner, whatever it was, is equivalent to the original thing. Obviously, the original thing was printed and traveled through time and is here with us. And part of its meaning is that it survived those years and it is damaged and dinged and it's maybe changed color. That's all part of the beauty of it, is ruins have their own beauty. And the amazing thing to me as I looked into it was that even the paper that was manufactured by grinding up pine trees, that was supposed to last for a couple of weeks, if you treat it with some level of care, bind it, put it on the shelf, and forget about it, it will still be going strong 120 years later. So that's incredible, you know? But I love digital things. I fall asleep every night reading my iPhone until it flops on my nose, you know?
You also made reference in some of our communication to the reading, the reading experience. So here at Arion, we make 250 copies of each edition, and that often brings up questions of access. Who can read these things? Who gets to have access to them? As you talk to our subscribers, as you talk to people who appreciate our work, they often identify that this is just a different reading experience, and it's one that's becoming rarer and rarer to be able to access. You said that you made reference to a study that we read differently on paper.
Oh, yeah. There's a whole history of studies going back maybe 20 years. If you really want to proofread something, numbers or prose, lyrical prose, or whatever it is, if you print it out, you will find more mistakes than if you read it on screen. Almost always, even if you blow the screen up big. I don't know why that is. I think even the most recent study, they don't know why it is, they just know that it is. And it's an important thing because it's not just the errors. When I write a novel, I write it mostly on the screen. I actually usually touch type with my eyes closed because I can think better that way. And eventually, it becomes a rough draft. At that point, I have to print it out or I'm not going to see what does work and what doesn't work. And that's just absolutely always true. What you're doing with these editions is you're saying, here is a work. This work has existed in print and has become beloved in some way, and we are going to give it a new way of celebrating it. We're going to think about it a new way. We're going to actually melt lead for you to give this thing to you fresh. And that's a noble purpose. It's not retrograde. It's actually, kind of pioneering.
Thank you. Your latest book is about teaching yourself to draw. Just tell us a bit about that project and if there are similarities or differences.
I'd be happy to. These are notes to myself. The spring it has, the tooth it has, the desire it has to hold an image. And this is one thing I didn't know, the finger smearability that it has. Paper is thick, but it's also rough. I didn't understand any of that. I wrote Baseless. I was unhappy. It was about germ warfare. Oh my God. My poor spouse and me, we were suffering through the 1950s American crazy programs, ways of poisoning the communists and killing their wheat crop and all sorts of stuff. And I was done. The book is sort of a journal combined with the history of it. So I just wrote what I knew that day because I had already written a chronological book in Human Smoke and I wanted to do it differently. So I said at one point, after this book, I'm going to teach myself how to paint. I have maybe 20 years of life left, time to fit in a little painting. So I proposed to my dear editor, Ann Godoff, let me write the next book about trying to learn how to paint. I said, I want to learn how to paint dappled shade. And she said, okay, if you want to write a book about learning to paint dappled shade. So first I went onto YouTube, of course, how to learn portrait painting in 12 minutes. And then I went on to Pinterest, and I found out that Pinterest is so great at giving you what you didn't know you wanted to see and just feeding your mind with what they call ideas, and it's images, and it's great, and I loved it. And I sort of lived on Pinterest, and I kept putting off the buying of brushes, the buying of paint. And I just watched YouTube, and I also, of course, bought lots of books about how to do this, which was fun. capturing light in oils. Oh, God, I wanted to do that so bad. So just buy a book and read the book. And I took a course, and this is a guy, Colin Page. I liked his paintings. He was teaching a course in color in a town in Maine, Camden, which was only an hour away. So it was a 4-day course. And I said, look, I've never touched brush to oil paint before. Is it okay? And he said, sure, just get some crockery from your shelf and maybe try to paint some things before the class. So you've held the paintbrush. So I painted this thing. It was not encouraging. I then thought, okay, well, but I can take a picture of it and I can get some transfer paper and trace it. And so I traced it. And then I matched the colors with the colors on the printout. I sort of dabbed the colors and I got a better thing because I had traced it. And that was an interesting lesson to learn right off the bat. And he taught us about color theory, and he painted his own painting, which was, of course, extremely good. And then I set up my easel and painted this thing, and I thought, this paintbrush, it's like holding a corn cob or some terrible, useless thing and dabbing at some piece of canvas that means nothing. But I then thought, okay, what I like, what I know, what I deal with is paper. So I got some watercolor paper. I went out to the yard. I got a leaf. And my wife said, oil paint is going to kill you. Just get some gouache. Gouache is thick, opaque watercolor. So just get some gouache. So I got out in the front porch and I just painted this thing. And I felt the ecstasy of following all the loops, the indentations of the thing with my pencil first, and then kind of painting in where the pencil had been and painting the shadow. And I began to feel good, really good, you know? And I thought, well, okay, maybe I'm a drawer. So I started to draw stuff I liked. Pinterest was giving me reams of good stuff. So here's somebody named Elaine Hagler who painted a really nice painting of a woman sitting in a chair. And I tried to draw her. And here's Heinrich Vogler, another woman sitting in another chair. Tried to draw, and another chair, and it was another, and I was very dissatisfied. And so I thought, okay, let me draw famous people, and then I'll know at a glance, have you made it look like that person or not? I mean, are you getting it or not? Well, got Chevy Chase, Anais Nin, I got Jean Cocteau, I got Kate Beckinsale, I've got Xavier Bardem, and I got E.B. White. But did I really? No. They don't really know. So looking around, I noticed that some people were suggesting that you trace on a computer screen. Oh, you trace it, do you? Well, I knew about that from my transfer paper experience. And here's this woman, Lisa Lacree, who's on YouTube, and she's showing how to trace this picture of an elephant with his tongue in his nose. It's kind of amazing picture. And then I was reading about Albrecht Dürer, and what he said was, draw whatever you wish to paint on the pane of glass. So here's this guy, he's got a pane of glass, he's drawing the portrait of the person sitting in the chair, but he draws on the pane of glass. Well, that's like tracing on the screen, isn't it? This is very suitable for portraiture, says Dürer. So I started to think about doing it, but then I thought, no, I'm not going to do it. It's a crutch. It's a sickness. It's an addiction. I'm not going to do it. So I bought a proportional divider, which is a Renaissance instrument, and I started drawing using this proportional divider to measure, how far are the eyes apart, where's the nostril versus the ear. I made some progress. And then I took a art class with Karen O'Neill, and I thought, I'm going to learn to, paint these beautiful paintings like Karen O'Neill at the Art Students League. And she had done this beautiful thing of setting up, every student had a different still life assignment. So I had this melon, apple, 2 cherries, and a plate. And it was ecstasy, because you just had to paint what was there. And the great thing is It's not like the human face. It just has to look like a slice of melon. It doesn't have, I mean, there are a zillion slices of melon in the world, but you're never going to be able to identify that particular melon. So it's not like finding a likeness. Okay, now can I apply that to faces? Well, absolutely not. Because here's this beautiful painting by somebody named Albert Martin. This is his wife, actually, he painted. And it's a pensive, thoughtful expression of a human being having a thought. And there, I got the colors and the thing, but no thought. And here's this guy, his self-portrait. Here he is wearing a hat. He's a human being. That's all I know. Is he him? No. So I thought, okay, we'll go back to the pencil. The pencil and the paper is crucial. So I started Susan Sontag #1, Susan Sontag #2, Mary Tyler Moore. Susan Sontag #3, right? But it still doesn't look like Susan Sontag, even with the proportional divider. Catherine White, who was the great New Yorker editor. Yeah, no, well, the nose is okay, but it doesn't look, so at some point I reached this moment, a deep feeling of desperation and despair and craving for reality. And I taped the paper onto the screen of a picture of Vladimir Nabokov in a boat in Cambridge. He went on boats and he smoked a cigarette. And I didn't even know that when I looked at the picture. I only knew it when I traced the picture. For the first time, I traced. And it goes, here he looks like Martin Amis. Okay, so Nabokov, that looks a little bit, more like Nabokov. The wrinkles are right in his shirt. The oar is there, and I was off. So here's Harold Ross, editor of The New Yorker, and my two earlier versions, boxing promoter, I would say, something, and he still looks a little like a boxing promoter, but in a good way. Renee Magritte and Georgette Berger, I love Magritte, and my earlier effort was something went wrong with the eyes. I don't know. What on God's earth was I doing? But I was, and then when I could trace, I knew where things were, and then I could spend hours fiddling with the hair and doing all that stuff because I knew roughly where the right things were. So, and here was Tracy Chapman, who's great. She's a great, great singer, and she's just had her moment. I discovered Pietro Annigoni. Did people know him? Anyway, he's really an amazing painter who was a prickly, difficult man and very gloomy, but he drew beautifully and he painted beautifully. He mixed his own pigments. He used egg tempera. Anyway, I did that after him. I started imitating other people. I did Jeff Buckley. I did Jean Cocteau again, and this time I was able to get the smoke in front of his eye, of his right eye. It's Gene Stafford. So here's the tracing above. I've got basically the landscape. And then over a little time, I did some one day, and then I would go back and do more. Here's a guy who was a health worker in Italy during the horrible pandemic. I've taped the paper over the screen. I've traced him, and I've got the kind of indentations in his cheek where the goggles were. So I got to know pencils. I thought I'd given up on the pencil. What is a pencil worth anyway? Why would you have a Ticonderoga? So long ago. It turns out I interviewed this guy who was a painter of trees, and I said, what's your favorite pencil? And he said, it's the Ticonderoga because it has the most beautiful and best eraser in the world. So I thought, made in America even. And my son gave me this Kurutoga mechanical pencil that is self-sharpening. As you draw, it sharpens itself. And I just had a new appreciation for the pencil, which I just sort of, I'd given up on pencils many years ago. Paper is thick. The thicker, the better. for several reasons. First, it feels good because you feel it's like you're on a podium. You have to do something good because this thing costs $2. But then also, when you tape it on the screen, you don't see it as well. The paper diffuses it. So you're dealing with having to fight the fact that the paper has obscured and interrupted the reality that is actually there. So the tracing is imperfect. So when you then start working on the actual work of art, you're correcting the mistakes that you had made when you were looking at the actual thing. But what I found was that the fancy, expensive French paper wasn't actually as good as the lighter, this is obviously not a well-designed cover. And it's sold in every Staples. You can buy this thing and go to town doing art, and it's great. And it's 90 grams per square meter, so it's a little bit lighter. And I've drawn hundreds of drawings this way. John Lewis, William James, and then I discovered Reddit gets drawn. These are people who want to be drawn, and they just post themselves saying, "This is me." And your job is to draw them. So I had a crusade, and I found this wonderful thing, which is everybody is very different from everybody else. Everybody is the same, but everybody is different. Everybody is guarded, but everybody is being open with themselves. I think this was the best drawing I did because I liked the hat. Then I thought, okay, but that's sort of confined. Let me do some loops. So I did loop drawing of Stravinsky and a loop drawing of Ingrid Bergman and Xavier Bardem and Chevy Chase. And this forgotten 20s painter, Collings, I did loop drawings of him and another Reddit person. So I did two versions of this woman here. Her name was, anyway, she had one of those combative Reddit names like Stormy Bitch. That's what's her name, Stormy Bitch. And I drew her first, and it was obviously not good. So it looks like something has happened with a werewolf, something. Then it was time to try to draw my family, and that's the hardest of all, because you really do know what they look like. So my wife, my daughter, I drew selfies. This is a later drawing, the bottom one with her new wife. And then my son, who's holding a Lego creation. He's in the audience, by the way. Hi, Eli. With his partner, Isamar, and my parents, and my sister and her partner, who has just caught a tiny fish. And I drew some writers that I liked, Agatha Christie and Kurt Vonnegut. Part of the reason you draw is to say thank you to the photograph. And then it was time for color. So I did the pencil drawings on the thick paper, and then I added pastel pencil. And yellow began to really interest me, so I made a coloring book for myself. And then I realized that what it was all about was the smile. You can get a likeness of a person, but you also have to get the likeness of the person when they're smiling, and their smiles are very complicated. Some of them are guarded, some of them are fake, some of them are full of joy, and that the smiles were missing from the history of art. If you look through, there's very few of them, except Dutch drunks are, but man, that's what it's about. Anyway, when I finished the book, my editor said, we need you to do some self-portraits. And I tried self-portraits. This was one I had been reading about the Cold War too much, and that was me reading about the Cold War too much. And Godoff said, we need some other self-portraits. So I tried a whole bunch of them. I tried a trompe-l'oeil, Kurutoga mechanical pencil there in the middle, a loop drawing, and I tried to smile, and it was horrible. But then I did Finding a Likeness, me photographed by my wife holding our dear dog, Cedric. And that's what I did. Thanks.